Welcome to lesson number 4, Regulations. Now in this lesson, we'll cover what you need to know to legally operate an aircraft in the United States airspace system. Now, as a private pilot, you must know the federal aviation regulations governing flight. It's equally important to understand these are minimums. Circumstances and experience may require you to fly to higher standards to maintain safe flight. In addition to the many privileges that come with a private pilot certificate, there are also limitations. You must understand what regulations pertain as pilot in command. They ensure your safety as well as that of your passengers, other aircraft, and property. Now, there are 16 topics covered in this lesson. These are category, class, and type, logbook requirements, certificates, medical requirements, pilot privileges, currency requirements, pilot responsibilities, pre-flight requirements, flight plans, altitude regulations, VFR minimums, right-of-way rules, speed limits, maintenance requirements, circulars and ADs, and of course, NTSB issues. We are very happy to have in the studio today Dorothy Schick talking about regulations. Now, Dorothy owns and operates Take Wing. It's a flight school in Eugene, Oregon, providing pilot training and aircraft rentals for both general aviation and light sport aircraft. Now, Dorothy is a flight instructor and the author of the Pilot Logbook and Journal, and she's currently working on another book for private pilots who are interested in teaching sport pilots to fly. Dorothy, welcome.
Nice to be here.
Pleasure having you. Now, regulations, there are a ton of regulations. They change often. It's kind of, it's a mess if you let it be. But what would you recommend to pilots so that they can ensure to themselves that they're operating to current rules?
Well, of course, there is a lot of information. But it is important to know that we have to adhere as pilots to the regulations that apply to our type of operation. So I have 4 ideas that would help. One is subscribe to ASA's Federal Aviation Regulation Update Service, which is an email update, and that way you can take a look at what's important to just your type of operation. Secondly, I would highly recommend maintaining a membership with one of the aviation membership organizations, either AOPA, EAA, or National Association of Flight Instructors, for example. Obviously, consulting with a flight instructor is a great idea, since they're supposed to keep abreast of all the aviations and how to interpret them. And then finally, I highly recommend checking NOTAMs before you leave for a flight.
Now, the FAA regulations are often referred to as FARs, the acronym for Federal Aviation Regulations. You might also hear the regulations referred to as 14 CFR. This stands for Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, which is where aviation regulations are found. This lesson summarizes the operational and pilot requirements you need to know for the knowledge exam. You'll find basic flight information and operational procedures in the AIM or AIM. Now, AIM is the acronym for Aeronautical Information Manual. The FARs and AIM are the documents with which you need to be familiar as a pilot. It's important to have a current copy of the FAR AIM, as information is updated on a regular basis. The regulations of particular interest to pilots are Part 1, Definitions and Abbreviations. Part 61 prescribes requirements for issuing, privileges, and limitations for pilot and flight instructor certificates and ratings. Now, Part 91 covers rules for operating aircraft within the United States. And the NTSB Part 830 covers the rules and requirements for reporting aircraft accidents and incidents. Right now, let's join our instructor, Robert Bremer, in the classroom and get started.
Aircraft, category, class, and type are what we're going to cover next. Category and class are terms used to distinguish both aircraft and pilot certificates. For certification purposes, aircraft are categorized by group based upon intended use or operating limitations. Aircraft categories include transport. These are the normal airline jet, Normal aircraft, where you'll find most general aviation aircraft like the Cessna 172. Limited or restricted, for instance, an experimental airplane. And utility, such as a crop duster, and aerobatics. Within each category of aircraft are classes. Class is a broad grouping of aircraft having similar means of propulsion, flight, or landing. Examples include airplane, rotorcraft, glider, balloon, land plane, and seaplane. The terms category and class have different definitions when referring to the certification of airmen. When a pilot certificate is issued, it lists the category, class, and type, if appropriate, of aircraft in which the certificate holder is qualified. With regards to the certification of pilots, categories include airplane, rotorcraft, glider, lighter than air, and powered lift. Class refers to aircraft with similar operating characteristics, such as single-engine land, multi-engine land, single-engine sea or multi-engine sea, gyroplane, helicopter, airship, and balloon. You'll need a type rating to act as PIC for any aircraft over 12,500 pounds, except lighter than air, a turbojet-powered aircraft, or for any other aircraft specified by the administrator through aircraft type certificate procedures.
Okay, under category, class, and type, let's take a few questions. With respect to the certification of aircraft, which is a class of aircraft? A, B, or C? Have a look. Again, with respect to the certification of aircraft, which is a class of aircraft? The answer, A, airplane, rotorcraft, glider, or balloon. Now, remember, with respect to the certification of aircraft, class is a broad grouping of aircraft having similar means of propulsion, flight, or landing. All right, let's go to question number 2. With respect to the certification of airmen, which is a class of aircraft? Again, you have 3 potential answers. Review them. Okay, do you have your answer? Let's see. With respect to the certification of airmen, which is a class of aircraft? The answer, B, single-engine land and sea, multi-engine land and sea. Again, a little explanation here. With respect to the certification of airmen, a class refers to aircraft with similar operating characteristics such as single-engine land-sea and multi-engine land-sea, gyroplane, helicopter, airship, and free balloon. Okay, let's take a third question here. The pilot in command is required to hold a type rating in which aircraft? Again, you have 3 possible answers. Only one is correct. Okay, let's see which one you chose. The pilot in command is required to hold a type rating in which aircraft? The answer? C, aircraft having a gross weight of more than 12,500 pounds. By way of further explanation, a type rating is required in order for the pilot to act as pilot in command of a large aircraft, except lighter than air, which is further defined as more than 12,500 pounds maximum certificated takeoff weight, or a turbojet-powered aircraft. There you have it. Now let's return to the classroom and Robert with a new topic. Logbook requirements.
In addition to the correct category and class of aircraft on your pilot certificate, you need additional training and an endorsement in your logbook to operate certain kinds of aircraft. These aircraft include high performance and complex airplanes. A high-performance airplane is one with an engine of more than 200 horsepower. A complex airplane is one with retractable landing gear, flaps, and a controllable pitch propeller. To act as pilot in command, of either a high-performance or a complex airplane, you must log ground and flight instruction from an authorized instructor and receive a one-time endorsement from an authorized instructor who certifies you are proficient to operate the aircraft. Additional training and endorsements are also required to operate a tailwheel airplane or a pressurized aircraft capable of operating at high altitudes above 25,000 feet MSL.
Okay, let's cover a question now on logbook requirements. In order to act as pilot in command of a high-performance airplane, the pilot must have, it's either A, B, or C. Take your time. Okay, let's see which one you chose. In order to act as pilot in command of a high-performance airplane, the pilot must have, correct answer B, received and logged ground and flight instruction in an airplane that has more than 200 horsepower. Further explanation, the key is 200 horsepower. A high-performance airplane is one with more than 200 horsepower. No person holding a private or commercial pilot certificate may pilot a high-performance aircraft unless he or she has received ground and flight instruction and has been certified proficient in his or her logbook. It's that simple. Okay, let's get back to Robert in the classroom for a new topic. This one, certificates. See you in a few.
When operating as pilot in command, you must have in your possession your pilot certificate, your photo ID, and your current medical certificate. You must present your pilot certificate and/or medical certificate for inspection when requested from any FAA, NTSB, or federal, state, or local law enforcement officer. They don't need to have probable cause. They only need to ask you for it. Each aircraft, in addition to the required pilot documentation, must have certain documents aboard at all times. We use the acronym AERO to remember these documents: the Airworthiness Certificate, Registration Certificate, and operating limitations must always be in the aircraft. Operating limitations can be found in your FAA-approved flight manual and on markings and plate cards throughout the airplane. The Airworthiness Certificate verifies that the aircraft is airworthy or was at the time the certificate was issued. This certificate never expires and is valid for as long as the aircraft is maintained and operated in accordance with the regulations. The Airworthiness Certificate must be displayed in the cockpit or in the cabin entrance.
Welcome back. Let's take a question covering certificates. What documents must be in your personal possession or readily accessible in the aircraft when operating as pilot in command of an aircraft? Please take a look at the potential answers. Okay, let's have a look at the correct answer. Question, what documents must be in your personal possession or readily accessible in the aircraft when operating as pilot in command of an aircraft? Correct answer, A, an appropriate pilot certificate and an appropriate current medical certificate if required. Remember, you must have the appropriate pilot certificate, a photo ID, and an appropriate medical certificate in your possession when operating an aircraft. Okay, let's cover a new topic with Robert in the classroom. This one, medical requirements.
With the exception of sport pilots or those operating a glider or a balloon, pilots are required to have a medical certificate issued by an aviation medical examiner or AME. There are 3 classes of medical certificates. A first-class medical certificate is required when operating or exercising the privileges of the Airline Transport Pilot Certificate and expires at the end of the 6th calendar month after the date of examination. A second-class medical certificate is required to exercise the privileges of a commercial pilot certificate and expires at the end of the 12th calendar month after the date of the examination. A third-class medical certificate is required to exercise the privileges of a private pilot certificate. The expiration date for a third-class medical depends on the pilot's age. If the pilot is over 40, it expires at the end of the 24th calendar month after the date of examination. If you're under 40, it expires at the end of the 36th calendar month after the date of the examination.
Okay, let's take a look now at a question regarding medical requirements. A third-class medical certificate is issued to a 36-year-old pilot on August 10th this year. To exercise the privileges of a private pilot certificate, the medical certificate will be valid until midnight on what? Which one of these dates? And look at them closely. Okay, little tricky here. The third-class medical certificate is issued to a 36-year-old pilot on August 10th this year. To exercise the privileges of a private pilot certificate, the medical certificate will be valid until midnight on which of these dates? The correct answer, C, August 31st, 3 years later. This pilot is under 40 years of age, so the medical certificate expires after 3 years. All right, back to Robert in the classroom. New topic, pilot privileges. See you back here in a bit.
There are 6 different pilot certificates, each varying in the experience and knowledge requirements, as well as their associated privileges and limitations. The holder of a student pilot certificate is limited to solo flights or flights with an instructor. Often the student pilot certificate is issued on the backside of your third-class medical certificate. You must have a student pilot certificate before your first solo flight. As a private pilot, you have unlimited solo privileges, and you may carry passengers or cargo for pleasure or for personal business. You are prohibited from acting as pilot in command of an aircraft that's carrying passengers or property for compensation or hire. A commercial pilot certificate is required to do this. However, you may fly in conjunction with your job as long as that flying is incidental to your employment. You may share operating expenses of a flight equally so long as you pay the pro rata share with other passengers, and provided the expenses involve only fuel, oil, airport expenditures, or rental fees. The only time passengers may pay for the entire flight is if a donation is made by the passengers to the charitable nonprofit organization sponsoring the flight. If you move, you must notify the FAA of your new address within 30 days in writing. Otherwise, you may not exercise the privileges of your pilot certificate.
Okay, let's cover a couple of questions on pilot privileges. According to regulations pertaining to privileges and limitations, a private pilot may, take a look, A, B, or C. Only one correct answer. Well, let's see if you got this one right. We hope so. According to regulations pertaining to privileges and limitations, a private pilot may, C, not pay less than the pro rata share of the operating expenses of a flight with passengers, provided the expenses involve only fuel, oil, airport expenditures, or rental fees. Okay, let's take the second question now. If a certificated pilot changes permanent mailing address and fails to notify the FAA Airman Certification Branch of the new address, the pilot is entitled to exercise the privilege of the pilot certificate for a period of only, which of these, A, B, or C? Okay, let's have a look. If a certificated pilot changes permanent mailing address and fails to notify the FAA Airman Certification Branch of the new address, the pilot is entitled to exercise the privilege of a pilot certificate for a period of only, B, 30 days after the date of the move. Okay, that covers pilot privileges. Let's now get back to Robert in the classroom for a new topic, this one. Currency requirements.
Pilot certificates, except student pilot certificates, are valid indefinitely unless surrendered, superseded, or revoked. Does this mean if you received your pilot's license in 1968, you're safe and fit to fly today? Not necessarily. The FAA requires you to maintain a certain level of flight currency to exercise the privileges of your pilot's license. To carry passengers, you must make at least 3 takeoffs and 3 landings in the preceding 90 days in the same category, class, and, if a type rating is required, in the same type. These landings must be to a full stop if you will be carrying passengers in a tailwheel airplane. Otherwise, they can be done as touch and goes. To carry passengers at night, you must accomplish 3 takeoffs and landings within the preceding 90 days at night, and the landings must be to a full stop. This is true regardless of whether you're flying a conventional or a tailwheel airplane. For these currency rules, the definition of night is the period between 1 hour after sunset and ending 1 hour before sunrise. Now, we've talked about what it takes to remain current to carry passengers. There's another checkpoint you must pass to keep your flight skills current and maintain your awareness of the regulations. A flight review is required every 2 years in order to exercise the privileges of your pilot's license. This flight review must consist of at least 1 hour of ground instruction and 1 hour of flight instruction from a flight instructor. A logbook documents your satisfactory completion of this requirement. Passing a check ride will satisfy the flight review requirement and will provide motivation for you to add on a rating or certificate to your pilot license.
Okay, let's take a look at 2 questions on currency requirements. If recency of experience requirements for night flight are not met and official sunset is 1830, the latest time passengers may be carried is which of these 3 times? Now, if recency of experience requirements for night flight are not met and official sunset is 1830, the latest time passengers may be carried is B, 1929, or to put this in local time, that would be 7:29 and not a minute later. All right, let's move on to question number 2. To act as pilot in command of an aircraft carrying passengers, a pilot must show by logbook endorsement the satisfactory completion of a flight review or completion of a pilot proficiency check within the preceding how many months? A, B, or C? Once again, to act as pilot in command of an aircraft carrying passengers, a pilot must show by logbook endorsement the satisfactory completion of a flight review or completion of a pilot proficiency check within the preceding A, 24 calendar months. Each pilot must complete a flight review every 24 calendar months. All right, let's move on back to the classroom with Robert and a new topic, this one, pilot responsibilities. See you back here in a bit.
You have many responsibilities as pilot in command of a flight. The PIC is responsible for and is the final authority for the operation of the aircraft.
And Salem Tower Bonanza 169 Golf Romeo. We are on a extended right downwind here for 34.
Bonanza 9er Golf Romeo, traffic is an Alaris taking the runway for departure. Runway 34, clear to land.
Roger, runway 34, clear to land.
In normal circumstances, you may not deviate from a clearance once you receive one from air traffic control. However, during an emergency, you may deviate to the extent necessary. You should inform ATC of the emergency as soon as possible to receive priority handling. ATC may request a written report if you were given priority over other aircraft during an emergency. If this happens, you have 48 hours to submit the report to the chief of the ATC facility. As PIC, it's your responsibility to bring your passengers on the use of seatbelts and other safety procedures prior to flight. Seatbelts and shoulder harnesses, if they're installed, must be secured on everyone during taxi, takeoff, and landing. Passengers may unfasten these safety belts while en route. However, I always tell my passengers, keep your belts buckled as you never know when you might encounter turbulence. While at their stations, crew members must have their safety belts fastened at all times. The FAA is very specific about alcohol consumption, and just like on the road, there's a limit to how much you can drink. As a matter of fact, not only is there a limit in terms of the amount of alcohol that can be in your blood, but also how long since you've been drinking. You're not permitted to consume alcohol within 8 hours of going flying. Remember, a minimum of 8 hours from bottle to throttle. Your blood alcohol level must be under 0.04%. That's about half of the legal limit when operating an automobile. Your passengers cannot be under the influence of alcohol or drugs unless they're under medical care. You're required to provide a written report of any alcohol or drug-related motor vehicle action to the FAA not later than 60 days after the occurrence. Yes, that's right. Pilots are required to report DUIs in a car to the FAA. Did you know that you can drop an object from an airplane? However, when doing so, you need to take reasonable precautions to avoid injury or damage to persons or property on the ground. Formation flying is allowed. However, you must make prior arrangements with the other pilot prior to formation flight. Flying so close to another aircraft so as to create a collision hazard is prohibited. Carrying passengers for hire in formation flight is also not permitted. Acrobatic flight or aerobatic flight means any intentional maneuver not required for normal flight. For instance, a bank of more than 60 degrees or pitching the nose either up or down 30 degrees is considered acrobatic flight. You may not fly acrobatics below an altitude of 1,500 feet above the surface or when visibility is less than 3 statute miles. It's also prohibited within 4 nautical miles of the center line of any airway and within the lateral boundaries of the surface of Class B, C, D, or E airspace that is designated for an airport. Over any congested area of a city, town, or settlement, or over an open-air assembly of people, it's also not permitted. The use of parachutes is required when banking more than 60 degrees or pitching more than 30 degrees. You're prohibited from performing these kinds of maneuvers if you're carrying passengers. If the parachute you will use is of the chair type, it has to be packed by a certified parachute rigger in the preceding 120 days. If you want to act as pilot in command of an aircraft towing a glider, you will need 100 hours of flight time in the same category, class, and type, or 200 hours total pilot time. Additionally, within the preceding 12 months, you must have made at least 3 actual or simulated glider tows while accompanied by a qualified pilot, or have made 3 flights as PIC of a towed glider. As the old saying goes, with great privileges come great responsibilities. You must operate within these rules when flying as PIC.
Now, some have said with great privilege comes great responsibility. 14 CFR 91.3 paints a pretty broad stroke of pilot responsibilities. What would you recommend on how pilots can ensure that these minimums are maintained while establishing their personal minimums?
Well, 91.3 puts the final authority squarely on our shoulders. And because of that, it's important that we understand that flying has great risk. Pilots in general are not psychologically risk averse. So knowing this, that we have such great responsibility and that there are great risks in flying, what I suggest you do is understand some risk management skills. Risk management means that we develop and use strategies that mitigate as much as possible our exposure to the risks we are not capable of handling. A pilot can do this by creating their own personal minimums checklist. Personal minimums checklist is something that you create based on your pilot proficiency, your currency, and your exposure to the flight environment. You integrate this into your pre-flight planning, and you never change your personal minimums until after a flight, so that you're not trying to push the limits of your personal minimums. The FAA and your flight instructors definitely want you to know that there's a big difference between the skill required for a flight and the skill available to you from your training, your experience, your currency, and your proficiency.
Okay, let's take time out now for 4 questions on pilot responsibilities. First one, the final authority as to the operation of an aircraft is the which of these? This is pretty simple, really. The final authority as to the operation of an aircraft is, of course, B, the pilot in command, who is directly responsible for and is the final authority as to the operation of that aircraft. All right, question number 2. Safety belts are required to be properly secured about which persons in an aircraft and when? A, B, or C? Well, this is fairly obvious, I think, but let's take a look. Safety belts are required to be properly secured about which persons in an aircraft and when? The answer, of course, B, passengers during taxi, takeoffs, and landings only. Okay, let's move on to question number 3. A person may not act as a crew member of a civil aircraft if alcoholic beverages have been consumed by that person within the preceding how many hours, A, B, or C? Question again, a person may not act as a crew member of a civil aircraft if alcoholic beverages have been consumed by that person within the preceding A, 8 hours. Remember, 8 hours, bottle to throttle. Okay, question number 4, let's have a look. With certain exceptions, when must each occupant of an aircraft wear an approved parachute? Interesting. A, B, or C? Do you recall this from your lesson? Okay, let's have a look. With certain exceptions, when must each occupant of an aircraft wear an approved parachute? The answer, of course, is B, when intentionally pitching the nose of an aircraft up or down 30 degrees or more. Unless each occupant is wearing an approved parachute, no pilot carrying a passenger may execute an intentional maneuver that exceeds 60 degrees bank or 30 degrees up or down relative to the horizon. Okay, pretty extensive. Now let's go back to Robert in the classroom covering a new topic. This one, of course, pre-flight requirements.
As pilot in command, you are responsible for determining that the aircraft is airworthy before each flight. However, your responsibility doesn't stop there. You must also become familiar with all available information concerning that flight and perform a pre-flight inspection of the aircraft. All available information includes the runway lengths, as well as the aircraft performance data for the airports of intended takeoff and landing. You'll learn more about how to perform pre-flight calculations for navigation and aircraft performance in Lesson 9. Now, if your flight will not be in the vicinity of an airport, you must obtain weather reports and forecasts, determine fuel requirements, and identify alternate airports if the flight cannot be completed as planned. You must also perform a pre-flight check. Fuel requirements are as follows. For a daytime VFR flight, you must have enough fuel to fly to your first point of intended landing and then for an additional 30 minutes at normal cruise speed. For VFR flight at night, you need enough fuel to fly to your first point of intended landing and then for an additional 45 minutes at normal cruise speed. Use a checklist when performing a pre-flight inspection. Checklists for all normal and emergency procedures are available in the Pilot Operating Handbook that accompanies each aircraft. The importance of consistent use of checklists cannot be overstated in pilot training. Checklists have been the foundation of pilot standardization and cockpit safety for years. The checklist is an aid to the memory and helps to ensure that critical items necessary for the safe operation of aircraft are not overlooked or forgotten. If the aircraft has been stored for a long time, be sure to inspect for damage due to insects, birds, or animals that may have been making use of the aircraft while you were away as part of your pre-flight inspection. Be sure to check your lights if operating any time close to night. When aircraft are operating on the ground or in the air between sunset and sunrise, the pilot must turn on the position light. It's sometimes called navigation lights and the beacon or strobes. The regulations refer to these as approved aviation red or white anti-collision lights.
Now, another far-reaching rule is 14 CFR 91.103. Now, it defines it, you spoke about it briefly there, defining pre-flight actions, stating that the pilot must be familiar with, quote, all available information concerning that flight. Now, what are your recommendations on how a pilot should accomplish this?
Well, this is quite a catch-all, but I recommend using the mnemonic APFL, A-P-F-L-E. It almost spells apple, but not quite. What that stands for is A stands for alternative airports and alternative plans. P for performance data, meaning lengths of runways and weight and balance. F stands for fuel requirements. L stands for, again, lengths of runways and landing and takeoff information. E stands for evaluate the environment, meaning your forecasts of weather reports, your ATIS reports, and any other environmental factors. As they say, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. In our profession, an apple a day keeps the FAA away.
Outstanding, good answer. Okay, we have a couple of questions for you on pre-flight responsibilities. Number one, in addition to other pre-flight actions for a VFR flight away from the vicinity of the departure airport, regulations specifically require the pilot in command to which of these three? Take some time. Okay, let's check your answer. In addition to other pre-flight actions for a VFR flight away from the vicinity of the departure airport, regulations specifically require the pilot in command to C. Determine the runway lengths at airports of intended use and the aircraft's takeoff and landing distance data. Before every flight, pilots in command are required to become familiar with all available information concerning that flight, which includes runway length of the airport of intended use and takeoff and landing performance information. Got it? Good. Moving on to question number 2. What is the specific fuel requirement for flight under VFR during daylight hours in an airplane? Again, 3 potential answers. 1 is correct. Just a slight difference in the correct answer here from the others. What is the specific fuel requirement for flight under VFR during daylight hours in an airplane? The correct answer is B. Enough to fly to the first point of intended landing and to fly after that for 30 minutes at normal cruise speed. Let's take up a new topic. This one, flight plans.
As part of your pre-flight actions, you should prepare and file a flight plan. Although filing a VFR flight plan isn't mandatory, in most cases it's considered good operating practice. Filing a flight plan is a useful way the ATC system can keep an extra set of eyes on you. When you file your flight plan, it goes into the FAA computer system. It's used for search and rescue efforts. After your flight, close your flight plan, or they're going to begin launching search and rescue efforts. Here's what the flight plan form looks like. I'll walk you through all the information that you need to provide ATC when filing your flight plan. There are a few blocks in the flight planning form we'll focus on in detail. The remaining blocks are self-explanatory. Box 7 asks for your cruising altitude. This is your initial cruising altitude that you're going to be flying at. They aren't particularly concerned if you plan on flying a different altitude at some point throughout the flight. They only want to know your initial cruising altitude. Now, box 9 lists destination, name of airport, and city. The FAA wants to know the airport of your final destination. If you plan to stop en route for more than an hour at another airport, then you should file 2 separate flight plans. In box 12, which you'll see coming up right here, in box 12, you'll list the total amount of usable fuel on board expressed in hours and minutes. For example, if your aircraft holds 50 gallons of fuel and you burn 10 gallons an hour at normal cruise power, you would put 5 hours and 0 minutes for your fuel on board. The reason for listing your usable fuel in hours and minutes is because this information tells the FAA when to start the search and rescue effort if you did not close your flight plan. If this amount of time, 5 hours and 0 minutes, passes and you haven't closed your flight plan, they know you've got to be on the ground somewhere because you don't have enough fuel to keep flying.
Okay, let's tackle this question on flight plans. If more than one cruising altitude is intended, which should be entered in Block 7 of the flight plan? A, B, or C? One correct. All right, let's find out. If more than one cruising altitude is intended, which should be entered in Block 7 of the flight plan? The answer, of course, A, the initial cruising altitude. Remember, Block 7 of the flight plan is the place to enter your initial cruise altitude. Moving on to a brand new topic. This one, altitude regulations.
Before takeoff, the altimeter should be set to the local altimeter setting. If you don't have that setting, set your altimeter to the field elevation of the departure airport. For aircraft operating at or above 18,000 feet MSL, you must set your altimeter to 29.92 inches. However, private pilots are not allowed in this airspace unless they have an instrument rating, so you need to be more concerned with establishing the takeoff altimeter setting. Let's talk about how to determine the initial cruising altitude that you plug into your flight plan. How high do you fly for a given flight? There are a number of factors that play into this decision. Now, we'll talk about the regulations affecting this decision here and cover this in further detail in Lesson 9 when we talk about performance. First, we'll talk about minimum flight altitudes. Over congested areas, you must stay at least 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle within a horizontal distance of 2,000 feet of the aircraft. Now, in non-congested areas, you need to remain at least 500 feet above any object of the surface, and you have 500 feet for your horizontal radius. When flying over open water or a sparsely populated area, you must maintain at least a 500-foot horizontal distance from any object. However, you may fly as low as you want. There's no restriction. Now, regardless of where you fly, you must maintain an altitude that allows you to land and not create a hazard to anyone or anything on the surface in the event of an engine failure. Your cruising altitude must also reflect your direction of flight. These are the rules that deal with VFR cruising altitudes. If you're flying from 180 degrees to 359 degrees, you need to fly in even thousands plus 500. If you're flying a heading of 240, you would select an altitude at even thousands plus 500. So 4,500, 6,500, like that. You would select an altitude at odd thousands plus 500. So 3,500, 5,500, like that. In addition to accounting for terrain, minimum altitudes for the location and your cruising direction, you should also consider equipment requirements. There are legal minimums where oxygen is required. When flying at 12,500 feet to 14,000 feet, the pilot in command and the crew must use oxygen if they're going to be up there for more than 30 minutes. Above 14,000 feet, pilots and the crew must use oxygen continuously, And above 15,000 feet, the occupants and passengers have to be provided with oxygen. It's important to note that AIM recommends pilots should use oxygen at lower altitudes. For optimum protection, pilots are encouraged to use supplemental oxygen above 10,000 feet during the day and above 5,000 feet at night.
Time for a couple of questions on altitude regulations. Except when necessary for takeoff or landing, an aircraft may not be operated closer than what distance from any person, vessel, vehicle, or structure? Which of these is correct? Got it? Okay. Except when necessary for takeoff or landing, an aircraft may not be operated closer than what distance from any person, vessel, vehicle, or structure? The answer is A. Except for takeoff and landing, you cannot operate an aircraft closer than 500 feet to any person, vessel, vehicle, or structure. All right, let's take the second question. Which VFR cruising altitude is appropriate when flying above 3,000 feet AGL on a magnetic course of 185? Which of these three is correct? Have your answer? Okay. Which VFR cruising altitude is appropriate when flying above 3,000 feet AGL on a magnetic course of 185? The correct answer is B, 4,500 feet. Now, a little further explanation here. When operating below 18,000 feet MSL in VFR cruising flight more than 3,000 feet above the surface on a magnetic course of 0 to 179, any odd 1,000-foot MSL plus 500 feet is appropriate. On a course of 180 to 359, even thousands plus 500 feet is appropriate. So at 185, we need to fly even thousands plus 500 feet. On to a brand new topic. This one, VFR minimums.
We talked about the terrain, direction, and minimum altitude requirements. When selecting a cruising altitude, you also need to account for weather and location with regards to the airspace through which you'll be flying. There are minimum weather requirements when flying under VFR in the various airspace classifications. These rules were designed to help you in meeting your responsibility to see and avoid other aircraft. We'll take a look at these weather minimums in detail. Lesson 9 will address pilot, aircraft, and clearance requirements for airspace classifications. You'll notice that the visibility requirements are listed in statute miles. While a lot of measurements in aviation are listed in nautical miles, visibility is always given in statute miles. In Class G airspace during the day below 1,200 feet AGL, you need at least 1 statute mile of visibility, and you must remain clear of clouds. For the same altitude at night, you need at least 3 statute miles visibility and clearance of 500 feet below the clouds, 1,000 feet above the clouds, and at least 2,000 feet horizontally from the clouds. This makes sense because at night you're operating with much less visual acuity. You can't see things as easily, such as buildings and obstructions, terrain and towers. Because of the lowered visual acuity at night, the FAA requires at least 3 miles visibility so you don't hit those objects. When flying above 1,200 feet AGL, but below 10,000 feet MSL during the day, you need 1 statute mile visibility and cloud clearance of 500 feet below the clouds, 1,000 feet above the clouds, and 2,000 feet horizontally from the cloud. Take the same situation at night. The VFR minimum visibility above 1,200 feet AGL and below 10,000 feet MSL goes up 3 statute miles because you need that extra time to see and react to objects and obstructions. You also need to maintain cloud clearance of 500 feet below the clouds, 1,000 feet above, and 2,000 feet horizontally from the clouds. Now, let's take a look at the VFR minimum visibility above 1,200 feet AGL and above 10,000 feet MSL. The visibility and cloud clearance requirements are the same for day and night flight. You need at least 5 statute miles visibility and maintain a cloud clearance of 1,000 feet above, below, and horizontally to the cloud. The reason behind this is above 10,000 feet MSL, you're in the territory of faster moving aircraft that require more time to see and react to other traffic. When you're in Class E airspace, below 10,000 feet MSL, you need to have at least 3 statute miles visibility and 500 feet clearance below the base of a cloud, 1,000 feet above, and 2,000 feet horizontally from the clouds. Above 10,000 feet MSL in Class E, day or night, you need at least 5 statute miles of visibility. Like we discussed with Class G airspace, faster moving aircraft operate at higher altitudes and you need more time to react. You need to maintain a cloud clearance of 1,000 feet below the cloud, 1,000 feet above the cloud, and 1 statute mile of lateral cloud clearance. Weather minimums for Class D airspace are fairly easy to remember. When flying in Class D airspace at any altitude, you need 3 statute miles visibility and cloud clearance of 500 feet below, 1,000 feet above, and at least 2,000 feet horizontally from the side of a cloud. If you plan to fly in Class C airspace, there needs to be 3 statute miles of visibility, and you need to maintain a cloud clearance of 500 feet below, 1,000 feet above, and 2,000 feet of lateral cloud clearance. Anywhere you fly in Class B airspace, 3 statute miles visibility is needed. The VFR cloud clearance is simple. You must remain clear of clouds. In Class B airspace, it's mandatory that all aircraft be in radar contact with ATC. Therefore, ATC sees all aircraft in the airspace and they can provide traffic separation. Let's talk about Class A airspace. In Class A airspace, it begins at 18,000 feet MSL. And to operate at this altitude, you need an instrument rating and an IFR clearance. VFR flight is not allowed in Class A airspace. Because of this requirement, VFR weather minimums do not apply in Class A airspace. Now, let's talk a little bit about special VFR. A special VFR clearance allows for operations in controlled airspace in weather conditions that are lower than those VFR minimums that we just talked about. You must receive a clearance to operate special VFR, remain clear of clouds, and have at least 1 statute mile of visibility. You must be instrument rated to get special VFR clearance at night. Student pilots need at least 3 statute miles of visibility during the day and 5 statute miles visibility at night, regardless of the altitude. You must request a special VFR clearance from the Airport Traffic Control Tower if one is in operation. Now remember, as a private pilot VFR, you need at least 1 statute mile visibility and clear of clouds.
Okay, let's take time to test your knowledge on VFR minimums. What minimum visibility and clearance from clouds are required for VFR operations in Class G airspace at 700 feet AGL or below during daylight hours? What's the minimum, A, B, or C? Got the answer? All right. What minimum visibility and clearance from clouds are required for VFR operations in Class G airspace at 700 feet AGL or below during daylight hours? The correct answer, B. Remember, VFR minimum visibility above 1,200 feet AGL, you need a minimum of 1 statute mile visibility and must remain clear of clouds all the way around the cloud. 1 mile minimum visibility. Okay, let's tackle a new topic. This one, right-of-way rules. We'll see you back here in a bit.
Check out this right-of-way priority pyramid. Priority is given to any aircraft in distress. An aircraft in distress has the right-of-way over all other traffic. The next priority is given to the aircraft with the least maneuverability. If an aircraft of the same category, if they're converging at the same altitude but not head-on, the aircraft on the left is the one that must give way. The next priority is given to aircraft based on least maneuverability category. Remember, category is airplane, rotorcraft, glider, and lighter than air. When aircraft are converging at approximately the same altitude and of different categories, priority is given first to balloons, next to gliders, followed by airships, then airplanes, and last to rotorcraft. Now, if you were refueling or towing a glider, you have right-of-way over all engine-driven aircraft. In a head-on situation, where two aircraft are approaching, both aircraft shall give way to the right. When approaching to land at an airport, the lower aircraft has the right-of-way. You may not overtake or cut off other aircraft that are landing or take advantage of this rule. The aircraft being overtaken has the right-of-way, and the overtaking aircraft should pass to the right of this aircraft. Now, a motorboat to the left of a seaplane should give right-of-way to the seaplane. Now, that's an unusual situation. Here's an unusual case. A motorboat must give way to a seaplane. However, many boaters do not know this rule, so caution is advised.
And let's take a look at a question concerning right-of-way. What action is required when two aircraft at the same category converge but not head-on? A, B, or C? One correct answer. All right, let's ask the question again. What action is required when two aircraft at the same category converge but not head-on? The answer, of course, B. The aircraft on the left shall give way. When two aircraft, as a reminder, of the same right-of-way category converge at approximately the same altitude, the aircraft to the other's right has the right-of-way. Moving on again to a brand new topic. This time, we'll discuss speed limits.
For example, if you're below 10,000 feet, you may not exceed 250 knots. If you're in Class B airspace, you may not exceed 250 knots, and if you're flying underneath Class B airspace with VFR conditions, you may not exceed 200 knots. In Class D airspace, the limit is 200 knots. And remember, these limits are indicated airspeeds.
Welcome back. Regarding speed limits, we have a question for you. Unless otherwise authorized, what is the maximum indicated airspeed at which a person may operate an aircraft below 10,000 feet MSL? Maximum indicated airspeed, A, B, or C? We've got your answer for you. Unless otherwise authorized, what is the maximum indicated airspeed at which a person may operate an aircraft below 10,000 feet MSL? The answer, B. Maximum speed below 10,000 feet is 250 knots. And a brand new category coming up for you. This one, maintenance requirements. See you back here in just a bit.
Matt is right. The PIC is responsible for determining if the aircraft is airworthy. However, it's the owner-operator of the aircraft who is primarily responsible for maintaining the aircraft in an airworthy condition. This includes compliance with airworthiness directives, or ADs. We'll talk more about these ADs in a minute. The owner-operator is also responsible for all records of maintenance, repairs, and alterations. The annual inspection is one way to maintain the airworthiness of your aircraft. All aircraft must have an annual inspection. The inspection is due on the last day of the 12th calendar month following the last annual. For example, if an aircraft is inspected on March 7th, the next annual inspection is due no later than March 31st of next year. The inspection must be documented in the aircraft maintenance logs. If the aircraft is used for compensation or hire, it must also receive an inspection every 100 hours. If travel is required to travel to a shop for the 100-hour inspection, you have 10 more hours that you can use for travel. These additional 10 hours are included in computing the next 100 hours of time and service. For example, the 100-hour inspection was due at 2,000 hours but was actually done at 2005 hours. Your next 100-hour inspection is due at 2,100 hours, not 2,105 hours. Aircraft used for instruction require both an annual inspection and a 100-hour inspection. If you have a private pilot license and you own an aircraft, you may perform preventative maintenance on any aircraft you own and operate. This is limited to such things as replacing defective safety wire, changing oil, surveying the hydraulic fluids, and things like that. The complete list of tasks can be found in Part 43. The person performing preventative maintenance must make the appropriate entry in the aircraft maintenance logs. A description of the work performed, the signature, certificate type, and certificate number of the person approving the aircraft for return to service all must be entered in the records. An aircraft that's been altered in a manner that may have appreciably changed its flight characteristics or operation in flight must be flight tested by a pilot with at least a private pilot certificate and approved for return to service. Until this has been performed, you may not carry passengers in that aircraft. There are two pieces of equipment on your aircraft that have regulations regarding their testing and operation. The transponder must be tested every 24 calendar months and recorded in the records. The emergency locator transmitter, or ELT battery, must be replaced when 50% or more of the useful life has been expired, or when the ELT has been in use for more than one cumulative hour.
Okay, let's address this question on maintenance. An aircraft's annual inspection was performed on July 12 of this year. The next annual inspection will be due no later than A, B, or C. Which is correct? All right, here's the question again. An aircraft's annual inspection was performed on July 12 of this year. The next annual inspection will be due no later than C, July 31st next year. Remember, you have until the end of the 12th calendar month following an inspection. All right, let's tackle a new topic. This topic, circulars and ADs. See you back here.
FAA advisory circulars are available to the general aviation public through the government printing office or online at www.faa.gov and refer to non-regulatory material. In many cases, they are the result of a need to fully explain a particular subject, for example, wake turbulence. The advisory circulars are numbered in the same sequence as the Federal Aviation Regulations and are categorized as follows. 60 is for airman's information, 70 covers airspace, and 90 is for general operating information for air traffic control. An airworthiness directive, or AD, may be issued for any aircraft. An AD is issued by the FAA to identify unsafe conditions. They are mandatory directives for compliance with a maintenance issue. These maintenance issues are usually ones that may have been discovered by a particular aircraft after it has been through an original type certification process. ADs can be one-time or recurring. A one-time AD means the owner must inspect a particular component or perform a particular modification to an airframe once during its lifetime. A recurring AD means the maintenance will have to take place repeatedly, usually once every specified period of time. Compliance with an appreciable AD must be entered in the appropriate aircraft maintenance records. The owner or operator is responsible for ensuring ADs are complied with. Pilots may operate an aircraft not in compliance with an AD if the AD specifically allows for this.
Okay, circulars and ADs, here's your question. What should an owner or operator know about airworthiness directives, or ADs? A, B, or C? There is only one correct answer. Well, I think this is self-evident. What should an owner or operator know about airworthiness directives, ADs? B, they are mandatory. Absolutely nothing else will be accepted, mandatory. Okay, our final topic. Let's move on to NTSB issues.
Let's talk about NTSB issues and accidents. An accident is defined as an occurrence in which any person suffers death or serious injury, or in which the aircraft receives substantial damage. Substantial damage would be something that has affected the structural integrity, the performance, or flight characteristics of aircraft. Accidents are not events like an engine failure on a reciprocating engine, dented skin, punctured fabric, damage to the landing gear, or damage to the propeller blade. If you do have an accident, you must notify the NTSB immediately, even if there are no injuries. A written report is to be required within 10 days of the accident. A written report must be submitted only if the NTSB requests one. An incident would be an occurrence other than an accident which affects or could affect the safety of the aircraft operation. The following incidents are considered serious and must be reported immediately to the NTSB. The inability of any required crew member to perform normal flight duties because of an in-flight injury or illness, an in-flight fire, a flight system malfunction or failure, and an overdue airplane that is believed to be involved in an accident. In the event of an accident, do not disturb the accident site before the NTSB takes custody unless you're assisting injured people or you're protecting wreckage or cargo.
Okay, for our final topic in regulations, NTSB issues, we have one final question. Which incident requires an immediate notification to the nearest NTSB field office? Which of these three is correct? Okay, here we go. Final question and answer. Which incident requires an immediate notification to the nearest NTSB field office? The answer, C, flight control system malfunction or failure. Remember, a flight control system malfunction or failure requires immediate notification to NTSB. Well, that's it for lesson number 4. Let's move on when you're ready to lesson number 5, procedures and airport operations.